So, Martine, let's have a little bit more conversation around your exciting work on one thing. For people picking us up in the second part, I'm Joanne Miles and I'm a teacher and a trainer and a coach in the FE sector. And I've been working with Martine at the Guernsey Institute, formerly the Guernsey College of Further Education, for a couple of years on this one thing project that she's been involved in, setting up and implementing and evaluating, which is linked to culture shift in professional development. So, Martine, a little bit about yourself.
I'm so pleased you've got a slide again so I can remember what my job title is because it's particularly long. I am the Professional Development Manager and Scholarly Activity Lead at the Guernsey Institute, formerly the Guernsey College of Further Education. And I'm also, because I like long job titles, Programme Leader for Teacher and Assessor Education. That's me, and you've got my details on screen, which is great.
Excellent. And then if people want to contact later on, they can contact either of us through those contact details. So a little bit more discussion around the one thing. Where have there been particular challenges? Because I think this kind of cycle, it's not easy to get off the ground and it's certainly not easy to maintain momentum with. And there can be all kinds of challenges emerging in the context where you work and obviously in the last few years because of COVID. So
Yes.
particular challenges that you'd like to mention in the work that you've experienced over the last 4 years.
I'm going to, anyone who's embarking on a similar project to this is going to be a little frustrated when they hear me say that actually the birth of the one thing was not as challenging as many people would imagine. Now, you could argue that's because we're a small college and there were fewer people to sort of change the hearts and minds of. But I think one of the reasons it landed particularly well was that we were taking away graded lesson observations, recognising that they did nothing for professional development, and replacing them with something that had really good aims. It was about improving student outcomes. It was about creating ownership of professional development in lecturers and treating them as the professionals that they actually are. So we were taking away something that didn't work, introducing something that really clearly had a good aim, and the outcomes that we were expecting were positive. And we were saying we're going to treat you like professionals and we're not going to
Mm.
make judgments. We're going to give you a safe space to develop. There were very few people who went, yeah, no, no, no,
Don't fancy that.
I'm not up for that at all. There were a couple. There were a couple who said, no, I'll just have a graded lesson observation, please. But we changed their minds quite quickly, and that was largely down to the fact that I'd recruited a really strong AP team who we trained and supported. So in terms of people not engaging, we were very lucky. I think we did a really good job. I mentioned this in the last interview, of naming it and making it into a thing, almost something they could touch and feel but couldn't quite. That really helped. Naming something doesn't sound like it's terribly important, but in this case, it created the opportunity for people to have conversations about it. If it's just the annual professional development cycle, you don't have conversations about, oh, so what are you doing for the annual professional development cycle this year? You might if you give it a snazzy acronym, but no. But the one thing, what's your one thing? Oh, I'm doing this. What about you? It is a conversation starter, so I think that helped. So yeah, a couple of people weren't sure initially. We brought them around very quickly and didn't have any issues in year two. There are other challenges though. Professional development, the impact of it is very hard to measure, and we touched on that in the last chat as well. That's definitely a challenge. The other challenge is around a topic we're going to dig into, the division between quality assurance and quality improvement, and having to maintain the ethos of the one thing and for it not to get diluted by
Mhm.
the need to do QA, remembering and recognizing, and my senior leaders really being bought into it. That at times has been challenging. But because we created something that was really robust and research informed, to date it's standing on its own and has its own clear purpose. So yeah, I think it's a challenge that is going to become more difficult very soon. And the reason for that is that the college is due for its first Ofsted inspection.
Mhm.
That's a really unusual position, isn't it? Because most FE colleges in the UK have been inspected for many, many years. But I'm seeing that as a significant challenge with the kind of QA/QI thing. COVID did present a challenge in year I guess, year 3, year 2, year 3. And we had to prioritise sort of supporting the needs of our lecturers. And in some respects, we scaled back one things. There was still an expectation you'd continue developing, but reasonably. So yeah, there was some impact, or some challenge rather, due to COVID as well. So yeah, it's been an interesting couple of years.
I think it's really, really fascinating that what you're saying there partly is we really thought it out, we framed it clearly, we embedded it in principle and a clear ethos. We branded it so that people could understand it. And I think all of those things will really, really, really help you overcome some of those initial barriers of people grasping what it's about and thinking about whether they want to buy in or not. So that kind of publicizing marketing messaging is definitely part of overcoming that first challenge. You had support from senior leadership, which I think is another key thing, because you need to have the space to do the work. One of the key challenges I see in all these kinds of cycles is the time. Getting teachers together is really, really, really challenging now in the sector. So how did you work with the senior team to enable that process to happen? How did you get that commitment to the time that was needed for this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I do feel fortunate that I had senior leadership buy-in from day one. My principal and vice principal came to me and said, right, Martine, we know that graded lesson observations aren't working, that they're not doing anything for professional development. We've got an idea that we could do something different. Can we just explore that, kick that around, get some people together? And it started from there. So I was empowered very early on to look at the research, to talk to people, to get this thing together. Where I think perhaps things didn't work as well in those early days is we went full on focus on the one thing because it was so fantastic and we knew it was the right thing to do, that the amount of quality assurance, the kind of the measuring quality bit, I think we let that drop a little bit. And where I am 100% focused on quality improvement, but I do understand a college has to know the quality of the teaching and learning in their organisation. I get that. I think we focused all of our attention on this, which at the time was amazing and contributed to the success of the project, and having that senior leadership support was essential. But I think possibly we focused 100% on it when it maybe should have been 80% on it. Do you see what I mean?
Totally.
So, but in terms of time, because we'd taken something away, graded lesson observations, and we give an hour a week as a protected PD slot where people are encouraged to work on their one thing. My advanced practitioners have a remission allowance to support their colleagues. In terms of time, those are some of the things we did to create time and space. We encouraged middle leaders, so program curriculum leaders, to create some time and space in team meetings to work on one things. We had some inset days where time was allocated to one thing. Those are some of the ways we created space. But
how much remission, out of interest? Yeah, how much remission do the APs actually have? Because that's a key one for other people to hear, because that's a really interesting one across the sector, very varied.
And honestly, not enough right now. I would like it to be a lot more, but initially it was an hour a week. You've got to think about caseloads when you analyse that in terms of rolling it out to your own organisation. So to give you some very rough numbers, I might have 10 APs and they might have 8 lecturers on their caseload that they have to support through the one thing process. And that was about an hour a week. This year, we've added a little bit extra, hour and a half. If the AP role is going to expand, which I think it will, to take more responsibility for professional development and quality of teaching and learning in terms of improving it, it's going to have to mean more time.
Yes, I agree.
Obviously, this directly correlates to how many APs I have. If I have 20 APs, that's a slightly different kettle of fish. But you've got to, it's essential to invest in your advanced practitioners, whether that's training, but it's also time. And you also have to invest in your staff to give them time.
I really like this notion that you had one-to-one time already committed on the calendar. So it's timetabled that staff have got the hour a week. That's a rare resource. Most places that I'm working do not have that. I think
No, I
that's a
know.
generous and excellent resource to use, that you have this quite large AP team so you can spread their time across those slots, which is fantastic. But you've also got team time allocation and you've got your inset day. So
Yes.
you're actually making a timeline where you can have milestone moments within your process to capture this cycle, to keep momentum, to keep focus. And I would say to other colleges watching, it's fundamental. You can't bring this cycle to life without the kind of project underpinning that Martine is talking about. I think you're really interesting to me in that you have this balance of the project management skill, the sense of the big shape, with the quality of the conversation focus around the coaching, and bringing those two things to play, I think, is why this has been a really successful piece of work there that's stuck, taken hold, and is really flying. So what about highlights and successes then? So our question on the slide before, high points and successes.
I mean, anything I have to do with the one thing is generally a high point because it's such a positive initiative. It's just doing it is a highlight. But to be a bit more specific, I've had a few personal highlights, so I'll start with myself and then expand a little bit. So for me, being able to talk at both the AOC annual conference and also the SET annual conference, talking about the one thing. So professionally, for me, that was a massive highlight. And also for the organisation, being little old Guernsey, being represented on that national stage was really super cool. And I had so many conversations with sort of people in my position and senior leadership members about how they could implement the one thing in their colleges. And that specifically has been a highlight for the organisation because quite a few other colleges are doing something similar, and some are even calling it the one thing, which I think is
Great,
really
lovely.
cool.
Yeah.
So Capital City College Group have implemented a one thing, and they're a massive,
Yes,
massive.
group. Yes.
We have like 70 or 80 lecturers at the College of FE. They're like a proper big college group. So seeing posters of their one thing initiative around the place, that's just so cool. And I've also written about the one thing in publications like Intuition magazine, which has been again a real highlight for me.
There's a video case study, a small video
Yes.
case study that you made at the beginning, isn't there, that I saw that's on the ETF site as well?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, they were really interested in what we were doing in the early days, very much sort of linked to the professional standards. So that was great. Cameraman comes over, and just being able to like bring my colleagues in and get them talking about. It was a real highlight. But those are the kind of big top level things, and a little bit focused on myself. Actually, the big deal is the individual successes that we as advanced practitioners get to see, and like getting to support our colleagues trying amazing things. Seeing the organisation really commit to getting everyone to do QTLS and advanced practitioners to focus on ATS, seeing that sort of shift with, we've touched on culture briefly, but that culture of professionalism and all of those changes have been a high point. I love seeing colleagues apply to be advanced practitioners, say, yeah, the one thing's really cool. I'd really like to be a part of that. Can I be involved? Seeing sort of colleagues develop their confidence in that way and want to play a part in developing others, I find that to be really positive. The celebration of practice is the high point in my year because it's just so positive. The inset days that have happened in the past, sometimes there's a bit of politics going on, but actually the one thing celebration of practice is teaching and learning is awesome. What have you been doing this year? And I guess walking down the corridor and eavesdropping conversations of people talking about their one thing, for me, that's like, yeah, people are talking about teaching and learning as a result.
All of this sounds like underneath here we have culture shift happening. So if you talked about the culture 4 years ago versus now, what are the things that stand out that are really different? What's the change been, do you think, over that period?
I think talking about teaching and learning and professional development, that's the shift. And that does link into the professionalism piece as well. It's definitely circled around the ownership. It's circled around we're doing this for our students, just upping our game, and it not being the responsibility of management to up the game of teaching staff. It's like a bottom up rather than a top-down type approach. And that's a big shift. The conversation, the bottom-up approach to professional development. I'll be honest, I've been very positive because it's such an amazing thing and I'm genuinely enthusiastic about it, as I think you can probably tell. I am a bit nervous about the impact of Ofsted. That is having an impact on organisational culture as well. So I want to be totally transparent in this conversation. That is a real fact. Ofsted looming on the horizon has created the need to introduce new quality related policies. And while I don't think the one thing hasn't been affected by that, it really hasn't. And we've had our monitoring visit, and so I had a really in-depth conversation with an inspector about the one thing, and they were super positive about it. Really positive. It's just something in the background that I think could potentially have an impact, and I'm really mindful of it. And I don't know what the answer is, and I'm kind of watching with interest and being cautious.
It's something you can see. I mean, in my work, I'm really aware that you can see a kind of tail wagging the dog problem with Ofsted, that there are strands of work that are really rich, that are really useful, that are strong in institutions. But then as Ofsted become a looming thing, there can be a real, here are all the hoops we need to jump through. Let's reroute this. Let's not put attention here. Let's direct, which is not necessarily the work that institution actually needs to be doing. So I think you're absolutely right to be concerned and to be monitoring and to be really trying to have principled, thoughtful conversations about what are we trying to do, how are we trying to do that, why, what's the best way of following that route, as well as obviously providing QA, having those two things, the two balls in the air, if you like, without the one contaminating the other, I think is the important thing.
Yes, we are avoiding contamination to the best of our ability.
Absolutely. So overall, what can you say about the impact? What would you say about the impact if somebody asked you in the street?
It's awesome. Everyone should do it because it makes teaching and learning better and students feel the benefit. Like we said in our previous conversation, PD impact is notoriously difficult to measure, and we're always looking for evidence of the impact as opposed to proof of the impact. That's a really important point. But, I've talked a bit about how we do that, the practicalities, and I have focused on student development and so on. But actually, one of the really big, impactful things that has happened is the development of the individual lecturers in terms of their confidence and how they feel about being a lecturer, and realising that they have the responsibility, but also the ability to investigate new strategies for teaching and learning, new tools to go out there to talk to college. The empowerment bit, I think, is very important to highlight in terms of impact. All of that rich qualitative data tells a very positive story about what we're doing. And I love sharing it with people. Is that wrong? I don't think it is.
No, I think it's great. But there's something around, and you can see it in the way you discuss it and the energy you bring to it. There's something about the enthusiasm, the energy and the drive that you get from staff. When you create a great development model like this, it just sparks this kind of energy that you're talking about. So I think that impact, it's grounded in the correct ethos, the empowerment, the space, the ownership, the respect for the professionals, and then allowing them to really work in their own way and see where it takes them. And there is incredible energy and drive around that, which is evident, I think, from everything you've said today.
I think there's also a piece about sort of practicing what you preach. We are all teachers, and when we go into our classroom, we look at the needs of our learners, and we create energy and enthusiasm around a topic, and we model what it is that we want them to achieve. I think teachers are ripe for this type of approach, and so if we just practice what we preach, then I think that's a good starting point.
That's a great point. So the second question here is the tough stuff, really. Thoughts do you have about these tensions? And these tensions are really running rife in the sector at the moment between the pull towards QA, the kind of slightly checking, surveillance, really being sure that there's good teaching and learning happening in classrooms, that anxiety that senior teams can have around that, and that feeling that they need to prove that in different ways, which can create some really negative behaviours actually and some problematic practices as well. and the pull towards really wanting to drive improvement and development, and the tension between those two. So thoughts on that, because I think it's a really tricky one at the moment.
Yeah, and I think you use the word tensions.
Mm,
It is
yeah.
tense. That is the right way to describe it.
Yeah.
And actually, I've got such an interest in this area. It's the subject of my master's dissertation.
Right.
I'm doing an extended literature review on quality improvement and quality
Oh,
assurance,
wow.
and
Okay.
leaders' roles in the sort of policy and procedure side of things, and all of that good stuff. So I'm genuinely interested in it. My experience with the one thing has made me feel that if you get quality improvement right, the supportive developmental stuff, you need to do far less quality assurance. That's where I am at the moment. I was kind of hoping my research would lead me to some sort of like golden ratio of,
Uh-huh.
if you do this much QI, you only need to do this much QA. But of course, it's not that at all. It very much depends on where the organisation is, what the
Yeah.
starting point is, and you can only find the starting point if you do a bit of measuring. I think if organisations know that they've got the non-negotiables in place in classrooms, the behavioural aspects, the safeguarding the health and safety, all that, the non-negotiables are there and they're there, then going full on quality improvement through supportive developmental means is going to have a massive impact, and that quality assurance just becomes a check, and so that ratio, it's quality improvement, quality assurance. But if you've got a situation where those non-negotiables aren't there and you've found out that they aren't, then unfortunately I think that balance has to shift a bit.
Yeah.
And that's not where I don't want to be saying that. That's not where I want to be. We're all professionals. Treat your staff as professionals. But yeah, I think that's my kind of initial thoughts on the balance. I'm curious to what you think.
Yeah, my instinct is in many places the balance is out, that
Mm,
there's a lot of measuring of different kinds of things, often creating data that actually hasn't got legs, isn't sound, isn't doesn't tell you very much about what's really
tokenistic.
happening, tokenistic, and there isn't enough QI coming off it. So there's
Yeah.
an awful lot of measuring with very little follow through. So I
Hmm.
would always say to organisations, I prefer people measured less and did more to
Yeah.
move things forward once they've found something of interest, and once they've maybe done a series of drop-in walks and seen things that are for discussion, and they want to discuss those with staff, and they're food for thought, and then there's a sounding board space where people can think about taking things forward. I mean, I think there's lots of reasons for needing to have some QA, but I
Yeah.
think we have also a lot of sources of that. We have a lot of data in colleges that we can
Yeah.
draw on that give us the picture. And I think we're also often creating an awful lot more of it without then taking action to actually improve the quality. And I think that's problematic. So I think I'm with you that I'm really pro a lot of QI with some very thoughtful,
Yeah.
carefully framed QA. And I think that's what's quite tricky, particularly for coaching teams who sometimes are getting pulled
Mm.
between those two poles into forms of being which are uncomfortable, not very principled, not very helpful. So I just wonder, Martine, what are you thinking around this role of the AP in this whole field, QA, QI? Because I think it's a tricky fit for them.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And that's a really timely question because, as I alluded to, the role of the AP in my organisation is going to grow. I also mentioned the Ofsted effect and things like that. It's tricky, it's difficult. I feel that there are potentially two different types of AP that can exist. Those that are top of their game with teaching practice and are really able to identify what good teaching looks like and be able to report on that. The other type of AP has to have that, but actually perhaps excels more on the coaching and developmental side of things. So if my team, for example, had to have more involvement in QA, which I think could be a possibility, I would hope to have loads of APs and I could give one job to that person, one job to that.
Yes.
That's not going to be the reality. I think I have a logistics challenge ahead of me. I do feel, if I look at my own organisation, the quality assurance role actually sits better with a curriculum manager. The curriculum manager does have a responsibility for understanding what the quality of teaching and learning is like in their area. And perhaps the role of the AP is to support the curriculum manager.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
That's where my thoughts are going. And then the AP has a role in supporting colleagues who are wanting to develop in certain areas. So the coaching skills come in, as does the kind of high levels of teaching practice knowledge and so on. So I think I'm really keen for my APs to retain that coaching role, supportive, developmental, because all of the research tells us
Yes.
that's what good PD looks like, effective,
Yes.
successful PD. Um, that's where my thoughts are right now. But as I said, I'm knee deep in research at the moment, so that could change. What do you think?
I think it's important to try to be clear who's doing what and why.
Mm,
And I think I quite like the notion actually of having some people who their hat is specifically a QA hat. People know what they are, the skills can be developed around that. There's a clarity there, no problems with transparency about what's going on.
mm,
But I also equally quite like the idea that you're suggesting that maybe if the responsibility is sitting with the curriculum manager, the support for the QI aspect of that could be coming from the AP. So
mm,
the clear responsibility is more sitting at the top of the tree, as
mm.
is appropriate really in a management role. I think I'm really uncomfortable with this notion of an AP being put into a position where they're judging a colleague in a very assessment-based manner, which could have consequences for their appraisal, their role at the college, their salary, all kinds of things
Mm,
can be involved as you bring people more into that performance management side of
yeah.
it, which can be part of that whole QI paradigm. So I think it's really important to think it out clearly, to
Mm.
try and put protection around it, and ideally to keep your APs and your coaches in the QI space as much as you possibly can, I think would be my advice. Understanding that you have attention and you have a limited resource to
Yeah.
deploy. So it's almost trying to do the best you can within the constraints, isn't it? I think.
It is, and your point about performance management is a very important one. That is not the role of the AP
No,
in any
no,
scenario that
no,
I've
no.
encountered. Their role is to develop people, to
Exactly.
support people. So the minute they start heading into that territory, that makes me very
Me too.
uncomfortable.
Me
Um,
too.
I do think there is something in the idea of the AP supporting the program leaders or the
Mm,
curriculum managers, because that is, support development.
yes.
If one of my APs needs to work with a program leader to help them develop their teaching skills, that's great. We can
Yeah.
do that, and that helps them understand better what good looks like.
Yes,
But
but
the
not being the
judgment.
person who's in with the checklist and the putting the scores and the making those kinds of decisions. I think I'd really encourage people to step away from
Me
that.
too. Yeah, that's very much where my thought process is going.
So you've got an exciting model. It's still growing. You have a team that are developing. So I feel like it's an exciting future there for the
Yeah,
one thing and for the AP team. But thank you so much for sharing all of that insight with everybody. And I know you'll be happy for people to contact you if they
of
want
course.
to using the contact details on the slides.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'd be very. I'm always happy to talk to people about the one thing because I'm quite enthusiastic.
I think we guessed that one. Lovely. Thank you, Martine. That's really been a super conversation.
My
Thank you so
pleasure.
much. Bye.
Bye.